My name is Will Sparks, and I want to talk to you about the power of self-awareness. I believe that self-awareness is critical for not only reaching our highest personal effectiveness and reaching our highest potential, it's also critical in the way we connect with others, the way we're able to collaborate, manage our emotions, manage our triggers. Self-awareness is foundational, I believe, for reaching our highest potential. Unfortunately, I believe our culture has narrowly defined self-awareness today to talk about it in only terms of your strengths. Know your strengths, play to your strengths. We live in what I call a strength finders culture. Everyone gets a trophy. And that's an important part of the self-awareness equation, but knowing your strengths is only half of that equation. It's only half. If you're going to celebrate your light, you have to also understand the darkness, your darkness, my darkness. So what I want to talk to you about this evening is an experience that I had 22 years ago at the hands of the late Dr. Jerry Harvey during my graduate studies, when he not only dramatically increased my self-awareness, he introduced me to Carl Jung's concept of the shadow. In 1996, I started the doctoral program at George Washington in organizational behavior and development, and I was going to study under Dr. Jerry Harvey. Some of you may know his classic movie and article, The Abilene Paradox. The Abilene Paradox is essentially a kind of follow the leader syndrome we get into in business organizations. Everyone nods in agreement with the leader. I'm sure you all can relate to that. And we self-censor what we really think and what we really want to say. And Jerry said we would get on the road to Abilene following the leader. It's grounded in classic codependency dysfunction. So I was thrilled to be moving up to the big city of Washington, D.C., studying under the great Dr. Jerry Harvey. His books were the textbooks in my master's program. I just finished my master's in organizational psychology. I was beyond excited. I was 27. I was arrogant, brash, full of ego, ready to take on the world. There was one small problem. There was a fly in the ointment, and that was I was going through a divorce. But my friends and family had assured me that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm going to compartmentalize this, get through it, and I'll go on to hopefully do great things. So my very first class in that program was with Dr. Harvey, and I decided to write my final paper on the dysfunction of codependency in my failed marriage from my perspective. So I wrote this paper. I turned it in. The last class, he handed out the grades. It was one of these classes where you had to sit in a circle. I hated that class because there's nowhere to hide. And now I teach those classes, but at the time I hated it. And so he handed out the final grades, and Dr. Harvey started with the person directly to my right, and he went around the circle handing everyone their final grade, and he got to me, and I'm looking up at Dr. Harvey, and he's staring down at me, and in front of the entire class, he says, "Son, you're going to need to come to see me for your grade." And the class winced. I mean, you could hear this, ooh, not good. So the next day, his office hour started at 4 p.m. I was there at 3:58, and I knocked on his door, and Dr. Harvey, who referred to himself as a Bible-thumping Southern Baptist, was reading the Bible. Without even looking up, he just pointed at the chair across from his desk, and I took my seat, nervous, anxious, ready for the bad news, to be candid. When he literally finished chapter and verse, he turned to me and said, "William, son, what are we here to talk about?" And I said, "Well, Dr. Harvey, I'm here to talk about my paper." And he said, "Nope." "Let's try this again. Son, what are we really here to talk about?" And in my, as Carl Jung calls it, the fog of illusion, my 27-year-old ego, I thought, I suspect Professor Harvey would like my feedback on his class. It was a wrong answer, but I gave it. And it both irritated and amused him, but mostly irritated him. And I'll give you the PG-rated version of what he said back. He essentially said, son, let me be really clear with you. I don't give a damn about your experience in my class or your feedback. I'm going to ask you one more time, however, before I fail you from this class. Son, what are we here to talk about? With that, I thought, well, at this point I have nothing left to lose. I might as well take my medicine, get out of here, and go back to Charlotte, North Carolina. So feeling deflated, I said, well, Dr. Harvey, I guess we're here to talk about my divorce. And a little sly grin crossed his mouth, and he said, I'll give you a B- on that answer because, son, we're here to talk about you. And he held that stare and that point for just a second too long. And I remember thinking, this is going to hurt. And it did. I won't bore you with all of the details, but essentially he said, tell me how this all happened. And I gave him the version from my perspective. We were both from a small town. We had been high school sweethearts. We had started out as equal partners, going to take on the world. And little by little, this dysfunction of codependency took root in our marriage. I felt like I was responsible for everything, making all of the decisions. I wanted an equal partner. I wanted someone to push me, to challenge me. And all of that eroded. And over the years that we were together, it unraveled in this classic dysfunction. He nodded in agreement with some of the things I said. He winced in agony with others. But after I had finished, he said, well, son, let's end the suspense. I've got good news and bad news for you. The good news is you made an A on your paper. And based on the amount of red ink on that paper, that really surprised me because it looked like his pen had exploded all over that paper. But I let that sink in. I made an A on my first paper with Dr. Harvey in my first class. And that 27-year-old ego and shadow kicked in. So he began to give me some compliments about it's one thing to know a subject, but you have actually emoted on it. You feel the emotion of it. And you've cited all of these sources. You've gone back to the Greek philosophers. You've got Freud. You've got Jung. You've got Frankl. William, one day you can teach this. And he continues to give me accolades. And this is probably one of the most embarrassing parts of the story, if there is a most embarrassing. As he's giving me these accolades, my shadow comes right over me. And I began looking at his office, remembering the rumor I heard when I first started the program, Dr. Harvey was getting close to retirement. And he was looking for his successor. And the dean had agreed that Dr. Harvey could pick one of his, given his clout in the field. And I thought, this is it. This is why I'm called into his office. It would be too painful for the rest of the class, most of which were much older than me and had been in the program longer, to hear all of these accolades. It would just be too hard for them. And I literally, looking out of his window, going 2 blocks away is the White House. You've got the quad right here. I would probably change the paint, but overall, it feels good. It fits. And of course, he's setting me up, and he sees that. And right when he's got me where he wants me, he clears his voice, I think to regain my attention and focus. He said, but son, if you will recall, I did say I had some bad news. And as I had been glancing through my paper as he was giving me feedback, I noticed that at the very end of the paper, he cited Carl Jung. And I just glanced at it thinking, hey, yeah, that's right. I'm now colleagues with Jerry. He's just appointed me, and pretty soon it's good old Carl. He said, let me remind you, though, that I do have bad news. And the bad news is I'm going to give you an F in life. Dr. Harvey was a social psychologist, and he said, son, I agree with you. Your ex-wife is codependent. That's highly dysfunctional. Your assessment is accurate. There's only one thing worse, and it's you. You created this dysfunction. And you have the audacity to come into my office and try to manipulate me into colluding with you. That's for your family and friends to tell you everything's going to be okay. My job is to hold up the mirror and show you what you've done. He said, play with me for just a moment. That's what he said. Play with me for just a moment. I bet that you had to have the last word in every argument. Check. I bet you gave unwanted and unsolicited advice. Check. And, he said, I bet when you had an argument, you were always right, which makes her always wrong. Check. And now, you expect me to feel sorry for you. I don't feel sorry for her. And he said, while we've got this time together, let me give you just a little more feedback. And at this point, I thought, why not? Bring it. I was deflated. I probably had turned white or green. I literally remember feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. And he said, I feel like I owe you one little bit more of feedback. Son, I don't think you're going to graduate from this program. He said, you've got a South Carolina chip on your shoulder that's going to make it virtually impossible for you to absorb the kind of feedback I plan to give you. So I don't think you're going to get past me, was his quote. He said, but I promise you this. For however long you're in this program, if you'll take that time and figure out why the hell you had to do that to her, you'll get your money's worth out of the program and do the rest of the world a great big favor, whether you graduate or not. And then he turned his back and he opened back up the Bible and began reading. That's how I was dismissed. And as I walked out of his office, just for good measure, he began humming Amazing Grace. So that night, guess what I do? I call my friends. They meet me at a bar in Northern Virginia. We have more than a fair share to drink. They collude with me. They do exactly what I need them to do. We agreed that the great Dr. Harvey turned out to be the great hypocrite, to claim to be religious, to claim to want you to be vulnerable so he can help. And when you are, to pour metaphorical salt in the wound like he did, was not only unprofessional, it was unethical. It was immoral. Everyone rallied around me. What a jerk. Moved back to Charlotte. Thank goodness you only spent the money for one semester and not all the way through the program. Yes, it's an expense, but it could have been a lot more expensive. And I was going to move back to Charlotte. The next morning, I woke up a little bit later than normal with some bloodshot eyes staring back at me. And out loud, I literally said, he's right. Even when my friends were colluding with me like I wanted them to at the bar, I knew there was something gnawing at me that would not let me go. He was right. Not only did I admit that, I realized that he knew me better in 3.5 months than I knew myself. That was a defining inflection point for me. And that conversation stayed with me. To this day, I still experience emotion telling it. Dr. Harvey passed away in August of 2015, and he and I corresponded frequently. And I told him about this article that is now a version of this talk that I was publishing, and also a chapter for a book, and how much I appreciated the greatest gift anyone had given me. And he wrote me back. Actually, his wife had to type the email, but it was classic Dr. Harvey. He said, William, for God's sake, I would hope by now you would know I take no credit for any growth you may experience during your time with me, nor any blame for future regression. I believe that from this experience, there are 3 takeaways that I think that we can all apply going forward. And the first is the recognition that the kind of self-awareness I'm talking about, true self-awareness, hurts. It does not comfort. It disturbs and it disrupts, and that's why we avoid it. That's why we stay in the shallow end of the validate me, play to my strengths, self-awareness pool. But if you truly want to grow and develop and enhance your self-awareness, I believe you have to be willing to go to the deep end. So it does discomfort and disrupt, but it's in that disruption that we're afforded an opportunity for true growth and development. The second takeaway that I have from this conversation that I try to apply is that we have a moral obligation, I believe, to give constructive developmental feedback to those in our lives. And so often, and I'm guilty of doing this too, we don't. We sugarcoat the truth, or we avoid it outright. We don't want to see that person's reaction. They won't be able to handle that. They're going to get angry at me. We have all of these excuses to self-censor the feedback that could be their effing life story and a turning point for them. So I actually believe we have a moral obligation to provide constructive feedback to others and not care a little bit less about how they react to it and care a little bit more about this obligation that we have. The third takeaway I have from this, I believe that personal transformation, not incremental improvement, but transformation can only occur when we have the courage to face our own shadow, to look at the dark as well as the light, and to see ourselves for who we really are. Because when we do that, even though it was excruciating and very painful that morning that I said out loud, he's right, in addition to the sadness and the guilt, I also felt an incredible sense of liberation. To loosely quote Carl Jung, we don't become enlightened by trying to be perfect. Many of us have been socialized to believe that. Sit up straight, be a good boy or a good girl, make good grades. And that's important, but it's when we have the courage to acknowledge and embrace that darkness, that other side, I think is where true growth is available to us. So I'll close with this question for you. We all have an F in life story on some level. What is your F in life? Have you acknowledged it? Have you embraced it? Or are you still hiding behind it, hiding behind your shadow, trying to be perfect? What will be available to you when you do have that courage to face it and to embrace it? Thank you.